Hello everyone. My name is Joe KALLAS, and I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the CIPA Emerging Professionals to our second Present Your Thesis series. We hope that you all start to enjoy your deconfinement period, and if not, don't lose hope, it's coming. The speaker will present for 25 minutes and then take questions from the audience. You can express queries and thoughts through the chat box section, so please review the greetings in this section and use it just for the questions. Rebecca Napolitano and I will be moderating the Q&As at the end. We want to inform you that no offensive language, spamming, or mansplaining will be tolerated. Mute your microphone to help keep background noise to a minimum. Switch off video to improve network bandwidth. Only the speaker should have on his or her video. So today's talk will be with Lia Ferrari, who will present her thesis entitled Security Damaged Churches and Bell Towers, Analysis of Costs and Techniques of Strengthening Interventions After the 2012 Emilian Earthquake for Defining Guidelines. Lia Ferrari received her PhD in restoration on March 2020 from the University of Parma in Italy. Her main research interests include conservation and restoration of cultural heritage, analysis and diagnostic on historical buildings, and risk assessment and strengthening interventions of masonry structures. She is member of CIRA, Italian Society of Architectural Restoration, and MedLab, Laboratory for Monitoring, Analysis, and Diagnostic of Existing Buildings. But before Lia starts her talk, we would like to welcome her supervisor, Professor Eva Koyson, who is a civil engineer and PhD holder with a dissertation on the historical and structural analysis of the damages of the Parma Cathedral. She's an associate professor of architectural restoration and vice director of the Department of Engineering and Architecture at the University of Parma and head of the bachelor course in architectural sciences. She also teaches in postgraduate courses at the University of Ferrara and at the Politecnico di Milano. In addition, she is member of the doctoral academic staff in civil engineering and architecture at the University of Parma. She is author of more than 100 scientific papers and a reviewer for the International Journal of Architectural Heritage and other national and international scientific papers. So Professor Koyson, we're very happy to welcome you today, and we're eager to hear more about Lia's thesis subject. The platform is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me to present Lia. It's a real pleasure. Not only because Lia was an excellent student in the master and then in the PhD courses, but also to present through her thesis the approach that we have in Parma, which is quite peculiar to conservation of existing structures. Indeed, as you all know, in Italy we have a lot of historical buildings. And we also have medium to high level of seismicity. So these two things together bring a lot of experience on one side that Lia has analyzed on a specific subject. And also need to train for the conservation also, but in Italy we have architects and engineers who work on these structures, and often architects deal only with aesthetic and conservation of surface materials, and engineers only think about structures. In Parma we try to keep these two aspects more linked together. We have courses in which architects and engineers, students follow the courses together, and so architects will have more competences also on the structural field, and engineers will have more competences also on the theory of restoration and on the history of restoration. In this way, we think that our students will be ready to face unfortunately more earthquakes, more damages, but also to prevent these damages, learning to talk together and to interact between architects and engineers for the futures of our historical heritage. So Lia's thesis is a very important step of these researches, because she tries to learn from the experience of our latest and closest earthquake in 2012. To keep together the technical, aesthetic, economical aspects that are connected to the reconstruction and to the interventions. So I think her thesis is very interesting also for professionals because it gives the possibility to be ready for possible future earthquakes and future damages, and to know how to face them, not only from a technical point of view, but from a more holistic point of view, I would say. But I don't want to take the time from her presentation, so please, Lia, if you want to start, we will be here to listen to you.
So thank you. After this amazing introduction by Professor Corson, you can start now, Lia, by sharing your screen and debut your talk. Please unmute yourself, Lia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you. So hello, everyone. And first of all, I would like to thank for this opportunity and for this presentation. And I would like here to present the research I've carried out during the PhD program at the University of Parma. And this research focused on the emergency management of cultural heritage affected by seismic events. Securing the heavily damaged structures is one of the most critical tasks after a seismic event. And these interventions are indeed characterized by the utmost urgency in order to avoid the progress of damage, to protect the safety of people, and to quickly resume the normal daily practices. Moreover, when dealing with the historic constructions, the first aid issue becomes even more delicate and complex because of the need of preserving the cultural value of the building. And the solutions that have been adopted in the past in Italy demonstrated to be extremely uneven, often uneconomical, and sometimes even ineffective, or sometimes also harmful for the building themselves. Moreover, during the final recovery, these devices are usually removed and substituted with other technologies, resulting in a great waste of time, material, and money. So the aim of the research is to optimize the strategy for securing damaged buildings, seeking a method for economic and technical assessment of emergency actions. The research started from the study of the past, and so the main points of the Italian seismic hazard for the prevention of damages in historical mason reconstructions have been here investigated. And we see that the progressive awareness on this challenge led to the development of tools to improve the national emergency response plans. Here I've investigated the tools that support the recovery activities. That means tools for damage and risk assessment and tools for first aid interventions. On-site damage assessment plays a fundamental role in the aftermath of a large-scale disasters such as earthquakes. And its main purpose is to evaluate usability conditions of damaged structures. Specific inventory sheets have been defined to guide the emergency responder through the analysis process up to the final usability evaluation. There are several inventory sheets for post-earthquake damage assessment with a specific typological target and a specific aim. The research considered this one, that is the ADC model for damage and usability assessment in churches. In recent decades, also new tools for first aid have been developed, mainly aimed at its realization and design. Actually, this task has been underestimated in the past. Thus, the devices used until the end of the 20th century showed lots of technical and methodological problems. But recently, thanks to specific scientific studies, the concept of standardization and reuse of these devices have been introduced in this field. Nevertheless, this potential is still often forgotten in on-site actions, and the decision-making process is not yet completely outlined. Then the research focused on the earthquake that struck Emilia-Romagna region on the 20th and 29th of May 2012, analyzing the emergency management system here activated. The Emilia response showed several aspects of particular innovation, especially for the issue of unified management. And finally, the most effective architectural typologies, that mean churches and bell towers, has been investigated. The seriousness of damage caused by the 2012 earthquake are consequence of different factors, like poor quality mortar, improper constructive techniques, incompatible repairs, and the history itself. Moreover, these structures are particularly weak towards seismic action because of the architectural shape. Even more dangerous are the hammering phenomena between adjacent structures. And so the study of constructive and typological characteristics of these historic constructions has highlighted both the presence of intrinsic vulnerabilities and the sharing of the same collapse mechanisms, here well represented in the ADC model for churches damage assessment. Then the researcher goes on trying to deal with this problem highlighted in the preliminary analysis, starting from those related to the economic assessment of damages. The high frequency with which destructive seismic events affect the national territory generates significant extraordinary costs. Just think that in the last 50 years, 7 destructive earthquakes damaged the Italian buildings for more than 120 billion euros. Moreover, in 2012, the recovery of the numerous damaged churches proved to be one of the most expensive interventions. But anyway, what is important here is to highlight that the financing program of first aid and recovery intervention is based on the damage assessment carried out during the emergency phase, as we've seen before. So, the economic evaluation of the effects caused by the seismic event is essential for requiring a proper funding for reconstruction. But this assessment is as important as complex. The ADC model requires a fast evaluation of costs, but the lack of a guided path produces non-homogeneous and non-immediate values. Therefore, we have analyzed the cost of the 2012 earthquake with the aim of defining a methodology for simply and quickly identifying a range of first aid and recovery costs. 125 Emilian churches have been considered, and for each one, data related to cost, damage, and dimensions were found, verified, and in some cases corrected or even excluded. In this slide, I've reported two of the most significant charts obtained by correlating the cost of 2012 earthquake with the damage index, both for first aid on the left-hand side and for the final recovery on the right. These lines identify the average expenditure values. And thus, seeing a dispersion of data, we try to understand what happened in the cases that cost much more or much less than the average values. And we try to find some factors that could affect this expense. This analysis highlighted that neither the type of damage nor the type of macro element affected clearly influence the cost, whereas the architectural value, the technique used for first aid, and the volume of the building influenced the overall amount. Okay, and after that, the research focused on the analysis of first aid technique, starting from the study of the historical evolution. So in the past, wooden rakers were the mainly used first aid interventions. Then the progressive improvement of techniques has introduced hoops and structural scaffoldings, up to the present days in which the use of new materials, new systems, and new equipment offers many alternatives, summarized in this table. And so, how to find the optimal solution for the specific case among all these possibilities? As usually happens in the restoration field, this choice should come from the analysis of the damages occurred after the earthquake. However, the current ADC model is very generic in this part, proposing only a list of possible first aid and a blank space for freely describing the suggested interventions. Therefore, we have analyzed some interventions carried out after the 2012 earthquake with the aim of defining a methodology for guiding the choice of the most effective securing action. Specifically, 19 Emilian churches were analyzed, studying their damage, their first aid, and their final recovery intervention. The churches has been considered as composed by macro elements. And for each one, the most used techniques were identified in relation to the type and the severity of damages. This allowed to draft these tables that summarize all the possible first aid action for the specific macro element. And then this analysis led to some consideration about the relationship between safety and conservation issues. Securing actions are usually considered as something extremely contingent and temporary, and that generates great waste of resources, as we've seen before. But on the other hand, the same provisional nature makes this device reversible, a particular suitable features for intervention of cultural heritage in compliance with the principle of restoration, as also suggested by the guidelines here reported and by other technical manuals. However, this potential is often forgotten. And so here you can see some examples of the few cases that try to consider the first aid as a possible support for design and the realization of the final recovery, or sometimes also as a definitive element of strengthening. But this kind of approach requires visible strengthening devices. and this is difficult to be accepted. However, the integration between structural, functional, and formal issues, formal aspects, could allow to strengthen the cultural heritage in an effective and respectful way. And here again, there are some examples that seek for a balance between safety and conservation issues. So all these examples underline the importance of a critic, aware, and open project. The final solution arises from a complex path, searching for the right balance between all involved aspects. And once again, an interdisciplinary approach is here fundamental to overcome all these difficulties. So after all these considerations, some proposals have been outlined to help and guide the first aid responder during the economic assessment of damages and during the choice of the emergency action. So let's start from the economic assessment. As shown in part 2, the cost per cubic meter have been expressed in function of the damage index, both for first aid on the top and for the final recovery on the lower line. The analysis also showed a correlation with the church's size. And so here we can see that for large volume structures, the cost per unit of volume tends to be lower than the average values. Whereas for medium volume churches, costs are similar to the average ones. And for small constructions, costs are higher than the average values. Therefore, 3 different expressions of costs have been defined according to the volume size for both first aid intervention and the final recovery. And these formulations can be used by administration for a preliminary cost assessment in order to obtain homogeneous and more accurate economic evaluations, at least for Emilian churches. And now let's see how to choose the most effective first aid solution. We say that the first aid has 3 main objectives here reported. But we also say that first aid could have secondary aims, such as support further activities or definitely strengthen the construction. So try to reach all these goals. The first aid intervention have to be effective, and effective under different points of view: operational, structural, conservative, and economic. If the first aid satisfies all these requirements, it would acquire the maximum of efficiency. But actually, only some of these needs could be satisfied by a specific technique. Therefore, we propose an effectiveness assessment inventory sheet for each first aid technique. This document is composed by 4 sections and lists all the possible features that optimize the efficiency of the intervention. And all these features have been evaluated for the specific technique with a score equal to 1 if negative, 2 if average, and 3 if positive. But actually, the first aid effectiveness is also influenced by external factors, such as the level of damage, site conditions, and the architectural value. So the previous document considered both independent features, not influenced by these external factors, and dependent features, influenced by the external factors. And we propose this integration to the current ADC model, where during the on-site survey, the first aid responder can report the presence of an external factor with a score equal to 0 if the external factor is absent, 0.5 if it is partially present, or 1 if present. Okay, and now collected all the data, it is possible to choose the emergency solution for the affected macro element. First of all, we have to identify all the available techniques with the tables drafted in part 3 through the analysis of techniques. And then we can define the effectiveness of each technique, of each possible technique, evaluating them with a score that is made of 2 contributions, P1 and P2. P1 is the sum of all the independent feature values, and so it is a constant value. Whereas, on the other hand, P2 is the sum of the dependent features values, each one multiplied by the score attributed to the corresponding external factor. In this way, each dependent feature is weighted according to the specific case. Therefore, also the final score that represents the efficiency index of the technique is weighted is related to the specific case. Moreover, a technique should be excluded if incompatible. That means that it is present an external factor whom corresponding dependent feature has a negative judgment. And finally, applying this analysis to all the first aid possibilities and comparing the scores, it is possible to define an order of efficiency, which can help the responder to choose the proper technique. The method has been applied to the 19 Emilian cases, and the solution founded sometimes proved to be similar to the real ones, sometimes more effective. Anyway, what is important here is to underline that this method doesn't aim to find the perfect solution, always effective. Its objective is to guide the choice of first aid intervention and help its optimization, giving some indications that need to be adopted to the specific case in a critical and consciousness way. Okay, and once the first aid intervention has been chosen, identified, it is important to follow some methodological and operational measures that allow a further optimization if applied from the beginning. Therefore, for each first aid technique, a specific document has been drafted, highlighting the main aspects to care during the design and realization phase. And now let's move to conclusions. The research focused on the emergency management for securing cultural heritage with specific emphasis on first aid interventions on masonry churches and bell towers affected by the 2012 earthquake. By means of an economic analysis of damages, the study defined a method for estimating direct costs of securing and repairing damaged structures in function of their damage index and their volume. Moreover, through the analysis of current first aid techniques, a speedy procedure has been defined in order to assist the choice of emergency intervention, evaluating its efficiency. And finally, some reflections concerned the possibility of using provisional intervention in a definitive way. Therefore, guidelines have been outlined, identifying technical and operational measures for the protection of cultural value in damaged structures. And the study can be extended by considering other architectural typologies and other national or international areas. Moreover, the accuracy of the efficiency analysis could be improved by on-site analysis investigations. And finally, the development of a computerized software for damage, economic, and first aid assessment could be very useful to speed up and homogenize the procedure, as well as data exchange and storage. And that's all. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you so much, Lia, for this amazing talk and interesting presentation, and of course, the great work you've done here. I guess we'll all learn a lot today. So now let's go to Rebecca, who will be moderating the Q&A section. Rebecca, the floor is yours.
Yes, Lia, fantastic dissertation. That was a lot of work that you really put into it, and I can see how much time and energy it took. I do want to remind everyone that if you have a question, please put it in the chat box. There's no such thing as a stupid question. So if this isn't your field, please still feel free to ask. The purpose of these is learning and discourse. So I'm going to start with actually Joe's question, which is in the chat box. So Lia, can those formulae be easily adjusted in case future earthquakes occur?
We start from here, slide 23. Do you?
Oh no, I went away from the bottom. I decided not to ask my own.
Okay, can those formulas be easily adjusted? Okay. In case it's further earthquakes, of course. Yeah, of course. The formulas for the economic assessment, you mean here?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, for further earthquakes, they surely can be used for economic assessment and requiring the funding for reconstructions. They are at least very realistic for the Emilian churches. So if another earthquake will occur in this area, they can give a real idea of costs. Anyway, for other areas, they can be used maybe for having an homogeneous evaluation. So what is improved by in respect from the past. In the past, every single first aid responder make his own decision of the economic cost. And so all the evaluation were very subjective and different, each one from each one. Yeah. And with using these formulas, it is possible to have homogeneous values, and so they can use and maybe improve the equilibrated for the need of the new areas, but it's a good base, I think, for starting.
Yeah, that's a great and thorough answer. I actually have a follow-up question about that. So if you have these earthquakes that are occurring and you can integrate them into this great framework that you've developed, with climate change, we're starting to see more events happen, more severe events happen. How do you think you'd have to weight your formula so that way it accounts for that more? Or do you think leaving it an unweighted formula would still represent the system?
Unweighted, sorry?
So, okay, you're good. If you're taking a class, tests are normally weighted more than like little homework assignments. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Pesare la formula.
Yeah. Sorry?
Se devi pesare la formula, se devi dare dei pesi in caso di terremoto di entità diversa.
Yeah, it depends on the level of damages, of course, and this should be considered and make a correlation between the earthquake occurred in 2012 and another earthquake of other intensities. And as for other areas, also the intensity of the earthquake should be considered for reuse these formulas.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thanks for answering. Sorry, I speak a little quickly and I don't open my mouth.
Yeah, sorry.
So we're going to go to the question from Michelle Duong next. Do you see that in the group chat?
Okay, the last one.
Yep. And so the question for those who aren't reading the chat is, how many people are involved in the process? What are their disciplines or areas of expertise in making the decisions of which first aid approach they should be taking?
Okay. Yeah, in the decision-making process are involved different figures belonging so to carrying different aspects from the structural one and the cultural ones. So sorry, one moment, I just read the entire question.
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, so in this case, in the Italian case, the decision is made by a group of person composed by an architect, an engineer, a member of the superintendents. And so there are different backgrounds that are involved in these decisions. And in the Emilian cases, we say that one positive aspect is the unified management. So they try to unify all these figures, all these opinions in only one decision.
That was a very thorough answer. It can't be easy to try and take all of those different opinions and bring them down to one.
Yeah, it's difficult.
I imagine it's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
The next question comes from Martin Diaz. Do you see that one, Leah?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question, I'll read the first part and you can answer the first part first. Do you think the computerization with the digitalization and records of damages by institutions could have impacts on the costs, could make things more costly in terms of operators, data storage, etc.?
Yeah, of course. This a computerized system for all this process will simplify the management of the emergency phase and also avoid the overlap of the same activities. Sometimes I've seen that the main activity has been carried out by different figures, maybe also in different way we obtain different results, and all this is doesn't simplify, doesn't lead to an optimized solution. So I think, and maybe also there are many mistakes also in evaluations. So that's just to give you an examples. Some churches were identified as different churches, even if it was the same, or on the contrary, the same churches were not considered the same and surveyed more and more times. So I think that a computerized system will simplify a lot the procedure.
Yeah, definitely. I can see how people's diagnostic bias can really affect those scores that they're giving these buildings. The follow-up question to that is, what do you think about the fact that the process of digitization can increase time to intervention before processing data? Or do you? You can say maybe you don't. Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that the digitalization could increase the time at the beginning just to organize the overall management. But I think that is a phase in which that is fundamental, actually it's fundamental, this phase, to understand, completely understand the situation. And I think also that in the aftermath of this organization, it will shorter the times needed, the needed times.
Great, yeah, I definitely agree with that. Do you see the next question from Mario Santana at the bottom? So the next question is, how do you see the development of those guidelines for site custodians and other people managing those sites that don't have necessarily the technical skills?
Yeah, I think that these guidelines should be the most simply as simply as possible, and I think that some skills are already required just to understand the collapse mechanisms. So also if the procedure will be simplified, I think that technical skills are sometimes needed. Anyway, I think also that custodians could help in this process and in this on-site survey, because they, of course, they know more than the others skilled figures what specific characteristics in in the damaged buildings. So I think it's important to the interdisciplinary approach, I've said, to unify all the resources, all the knowledge about the building, and to make a common decision.
I'm muted. Yeah, that's always been something that I've grappled with, is how do you actually facilitate that interdisciplinary conversation? How do you think, what do you think are obstacles for the custodians and the engineers communicating with each other?
A lot of difficulty. And yeah, maybe I can make the example of the Joint Commission organized in the Emilia-Romagna response system. And this commission its aim was to evaluate the proposal of recovery, making together the architect opinion, the engineer opinion, so carrying both the safety and conservation issue. So it's, of course, it's difficult, but they just, they tried to seek a balance. Sometimes the architect doesn't agree, sometimes the engineer, sometimes it's not doesn't agree. It's, yeah, a balance, compromise, maybe.
No, compromise is the right word. And I mean, when I've been dealing with these kinds of projects, it's hard to get engineer and engineer to agree on something.
Yeah,
so
of course.
Engineer and a whole other group. It's a tough problem, and it's something that these kinds of guidelines, I think, will really help that communication. We have a follow-up question on that from Mario. So do you see the one at 10:40 a.m. from Mario Santana?
How do you see now where?
Yeah, how do you see the development of those guidelines for site custodians and other people managing those sites? Wait,
okay.
Same question, did he paste it twice? No.
Oh yeah, I've already.
For some reason I thought he posted something else, but he just told you did a good job.
Okay.
So, good job, Lia, from Mario.
Thank you.
Mea culpa. We'll go with the last question that's written, and I will spare reading the entire thing out loud, but take a second if you want to kind of read and internalize that.
Okay. So I read, or I?
You don't, I mean, you can read it to yourself or you can read it out loud.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. A question, it would be interesting.
Yeah, the question really comes at the end.
Great, but and everything is even everybody else, okay? With to introduce nurses in it and carry out the same times of inspection and academic assessment. That's a recommendation. Yeah, so in Italy, I think that the prevention is of course very important, but it is difficult to give this message to whom it can concern, to whom should monitoring and make maintenance, I think it's said. And and then also in Italy we have a lot, as my professor said at the beginning, we have lots of cultural heritage, lots of buildings. It would require lots of resources to monitoring all of that. So at least I think it's very important a preservation system, but it has to be weighted on the cases, and where if it is not possible for lack of resources, the risk assessment, the risk assessment, maybe also the consciousness of what could happen is good.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question about assessment and procedures for interventions. We'll look at the one at 10:40 a.m. from Noor Mata. Do you see this one? She thanks you for an interesting presentation at the beginning.
At the beginning, okay.
She says, thank you for this interesting presentation. You mentioned the assessment and procedure for intervention, but what about mechanical methods used to verify usually the vulnerability mechanism of these methods?
Okay. Was live? Okay. Okay. So the mechanical method used to verify the damages in churches were already studied in the past, and they were summarized in 28 possible collapse mechanisms for each macro element, for different macro elements. And in here I can say also that they use an empirical methodology. So they are based on the study of past damages and the study of how the churches behave to past earthquakes. So that part is already defined, and yes, everything could be improved, but I take it as done.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you're right that in the previous works, you have that kind of, you have that underlying and contained already in the formula that you're basing this off of. And yes, a PhD is a very short time in the space of this. But it's always good to hear these questions because I think it really gives us an opportunity to think about where we could go next and what we could think about next. I think one of the last questions we'll ask was from Stathis. It ends it in 33. I recognize I've been using Eastern time saying 10:33, but I don't know what your time zone is. Ends in 33.
It's 4:33 at your time, Lia.
4:33, there we go. It's the one that begins, what types of equipment for rapid 3D documentation were often applied after the earthquakes to help the structural modeling? Were only visual observations performed according to the Italian standards, or was something else used?
Okay, one moment, I read it. Information, videos for the heritage structures. Okay, and how did they affect the seismic response? Yeah, okay, there are several interventions carried out also in recent times, mainly maybe in recent times, that's worsen the church's response to seismic events, mainly related. Some examples are the use of cement for intervene on the churches, and also all the transformations carried out during centuries. So maybe some part destructed and rebuilt with not the correct connection between the original part. And some also the roofs sometimes are rebuilt with modern techniques that increase the weight under the ancient masonry. Sometimes also, yeah, that's are the main some example I can cite now.
Okay, thanks. And I just want to kind of wrap this up. It's been a really fantastic discussion, and I'm really glad that you were able to present your work here. My last question of curiosity from seeing this great presentation is, what are you doing next, Lia? What are your next steps?
Yeah, I will try to develop the computerized procedure. I guess I will do. And I don't know, I think I would like also to improve the accuracy of the efficiency analysis by investigate some interventions carried out in the past and studying how they respond to seismic events already occurred. I think that these are two steps I would like to try to do.
Yeah, that's definitely
Thanks.
great. Thanks for answering. And I'll
so I want to thank you all so much for your time today, and I want to thank you, Lia, for a great presentation and topic, and to thank Professor Corson for her time of her intervention at the beginning, and of course I thank all the moderators and the participants for your wonderful questions. Please stay tuned for the coming talk that we will be sharing the details soon on our social media platforms. And don't forget to register, of course, for our coming webinar on June the 4th, Virtual Reality Unlocking the Potential, link pasted previously in the chat box. At the end, please stay connected to our Facebook group and Instagram page, where I'm posting right now again their link in the chat box for you to check. And please don't forget to subscribe to our new YouTube channel, CIPA IP, where we'll be posting the recording of today's talk, in addition to our previous and coming webinars. Additionally, we encourage you to visit the CIPA webpage and INCOMOS webpage for more information about these organizations. Thank you so much, and see you soon, hopefully.